Is it morally okay to pirate discontinued video games? Did all of our problems start with Obama? Does Scotland prove that gun control works? We'll talk about all of this and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the podcast where we gather takes from all across the internet. We highlight the good ones and the good arguments they make, as well as the bad ones, and we try and pick apart the bad arguments they make. My name is Britt, and I'm here with my co-host, Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. You can find us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod, on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. Without further ado, let's get into some of these takes. So this first one is two. It's a Facebook post and then a comment beneath it. And it's from Engadget, a Facebook page, and they write an article, or they highlight an article that says the 3DS and Wii U eShop's closure was inevitable, but still a loss for retro gamers everywhere. And then someone commented saying, pirate them. If Nintendo isn't willing to sell them, there's nothing morally wrong with pirating them. As an avid Nintendo fan, Donnie, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, and yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, this is kind of a question that addresses all intellectual property in a sense. And I really feel two ways about this. But, you know, on the one hand, I'm very reticent to say that, you know, the government has an ability, or that someone else even just has the ability to copyright an idea or something that is intangible, like, hey, you cannot, you know, draw or put together, type up this line of code that compiles into a game that is like our game because it infringes on our idea and we have that idea first. That something about that to me doesn't seem to sit right. But on the other hand, what's happening here is a little bit less nuanced maybe than the ideas of that. When they're talking about the moral justification for pirating a game because it is no longer on the market or available, I think that is a bad take. I don't think there is nothing morally wrong with pirating things because of a couple considerations. The first that you have to consider is that from a practical standpoint, even if you're so for those of you who don't know, the eShop is a digital storefront, right? It's sort of an online service for older video game consoles. And they're shutting down the online service. So these consoles, while you can put, you know, physical cartridges into them and you can still play games that you've downloaded on them, they no longer have the ability to buy these games online from this storefront. And not all of the games hosted on this storefront are available on the newest console. It's not available online to buy anywhere. So you're losing access to a lot of games this way, some of which Nintendo has not put anywhere else, you know. And so the argument is, if I can't pay for the product that I want to buy, it is not morally wrong to download it illegally. I mean, again, we're not conflating law and morals here, but, you know, illegally download it from someone else who bought the software and then sort of copied it and put it online. It's not morally wrong for me to do that because there's no other way that I could pay Nintendo for this. And I don't think I can get behind and agree that with that point, even if I am, you know, hesitant to talk about IP, because I think that there is something, like I was saying, in the practical standpoint, where let's say Nintendo hasn't released a game in 20 years and you're like, I just want to pay to play this old game again. That might be part of their marketing strategy because maybe they're planning on selling it later and they want to build up like a 20-year hype. Now, that's not likely. It's not always the case, but there have been documented examples of it. Number two, the other prospect I have is you don't have a right to something just because you want it. So, you know, if I have created something and I was selling this product and then I decide I no longer want to sell it, just because I'm refusing to sell it doesn't give someone else the right to steal that in another capacity. This, of course, is where the intellectual property comes in, where you're not literally taking something from someone else because it is a digital copy. However, there is, of course, the opportunity cost of, if in the future I did want to sell it, you now have a copy with no obligation to pay me for the copy which you acquired from someone else. All in all, I think there's also something to be said about licensing agreements, where when you purchase a digital copy, you enter into a mini contract with the person selling it, saying, I'm not going to, like, by buying this, I'm agreeing to not provide this online for other people to copy and to steal. Again, whether or not you think that's a fair contract, that's kind of the assumption with every digital purchase you're making. And so at the very least, I don't think there's nothing morally wrong with pirating them. I think there's at least a question there. So I would put this in the bad take category myself.
Yeah, I definitely put it in as a bad take as well. To say there's nothing morally wrong with pirating, I do think, however, there is maybe a moral way to go about getting these, in some form or fashion, in terms of whether is if you want to go track down one of the original creators and pay them, or you want to donate, whether Luigi's Mansion costs $40 now, you pay $40 to charity or something like that, or you just commit to yourself like, hey, once this releases fully, I'm going to buy it. You know, and that's separate from like the law, as we've talked about. And I think that if you feel icky inside about doing something, chances are it's probably icky. So make sure you do everything you can to make sure you don't feel icky when you're doing something. In terms of like intellectual property, I don't. I mean, video games are intellectual property, but they also are property proper, right? Like they're
Hmm.
code that has been built
Right.
and assembled together in such a way that creates something. There was R&D and things put into it, and then physically compiled, and like there was labor mixed into it that you are benefiting from. Whereas like intellectual property, like there's labor that went into developing the idea of it. Like let's say it's the way an iPhone is designed, right? Like yes, there was labor that goes into it, but there wasn't necessarily like it's just a little bit different in terms of a video game actually has computing resources when each one is spun out, right? Versus intellectual property it's purely like we're saying, it's an idea, and that's why a lot of the most important intellectual secrets, ideas, are actually not patented or not trademarked or anything like that, because in order to do that, then you'd have to put it on the open market,
Hmm.
and you actually have to say this is how I designed it. And so like there's certain designs that Apple has that they have not patented because they're super secret, and they don't want to publish them because they know some foreign actor is going to take those and design their phone just like Apple. So I don't think that the state should be involved in intellectual property. I don't think they can actually enforce it properly. I just don't know if video games necessarily fall under that. Like I think about like UFC pay-per-views, right? Like a lot of my friends are willing to like go to a pirating site to do those things, like to take it and watch them. It's like, to me, I feel icky when I do that, right? So if I want to watch a fighter fight, like I pay for it, because even though like you could make various arguments about like, well, you're kind of more sticking it to the man, or like they're not going to notice the difference. It's like, well, someone is doing something and they want me to pay for it in order for me to watch them do this thing, therefore I should, right? And I think morally you should pay for things that you value, because one, it helps, one, it's the right thing to do, right, from our standpoint, and then two, it also helps those people create more of that thing. And I guess that's where this kind of becomes murky, right? Is like Nintendo is literally saying like, we don't want your money, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's where it makes it kind of difficult. So it's like in this type of case, I'd be like, hey, just do what makes you feel like it's right. Um, in the case that Nintendo does want their money, like you should pay them for whatever it is.
Yeah, I see, but I kind of like in this situation to thinking about if you were in a restaurant and they offered from you know let's say from 3 to 4 p.m. we're doing a limited promotion of unlimited pancakes. You can come in and buy the unlimited pancakes. So you go in, you buy it, it's 3.59, you buy your unlimited pancakes, you just squeak in, you sit down. Your friend comes in and is like, "Hey, I want those unlimited pancakes." Like, "Sorry, you know what? We're done. We're not making pancakes unless you, and
Mm.
for you unless you ordered the unlimited pancakes." And then I'm saying, "Okay, well, I'm just going to take my friends then." Do, do you think that's, because to me that's not just. It doesn't matter that they're not still selling the pancakes and there's no other way to get them except unless you have that deal. The terms of the condition were set earlier. When you buy this unlimited pancakes, there's an implicit contract that you're not going to go out and start handing your unlimited pancakes to every other patron in the restaurant. There is an understanding that you have that a one-on-one contract with them, and the other person didn't meet the contract. Now, maybe it's not fair, and maybe it's not a good business model. There's a million things that you can point out wrong with it, but I don't think there's a moral justification to say, well, just because they're refusing to sell me pancakes now, I'm going to go ahead and not pay them for the pancakes and eat off of your unlimited. Because what's the difference to them? That's the kind of that's kind of how I view it in a sense. I still think that there is something morally wrong about that because of these agreements that it may not be every time you're purchasing the product, I am agreeing to do this thing. It's probably in terms of service when you agree to their digital storefronts. And so I don't want to be a fan of, implicit contractual agreements like social contracts or anything like that. Frankly, it should be written out somewhere, and if it's not, then maybe that's a little loophole. But I think at least you can understand the spirit of the social agreement there. And if it's not binding, then I guess you found a loophole. But that's why I think, to me, it seems a little bit icky. I think,
Yeah.
morally speaking.
Yep. No, I agree with you on that side of it, feeling icky.
Now, where I do want to take issue with intellectual property is when people are building their own stuff from scratch, and maybe they're basing it on the ideas of an existing video game, but they're remaking it themselves. They're putting in the hard work. At that point, it's a little bit more tenuous to me, because if you're building something from the ground up and you're just using the general idea of a character or the idea of another game, I don't know that someone else can come in and stop you from doing something and putting in work yourself in the same way.
Yep. All right, moving away from Nintendo into other things. We've got a retweet here. So Ryan McMacken retweets this post, and it's a picture of Obama. And it's a conservative post, and it says, "This is where most of our problems started." Picture of Obama frowning. And Ryan McMacken writes, quote retweets, saying, "If you actually think things were fine before Obama, you are part of the problem." Were things fine before Obama, or were they not?
Yeah, no, it was clearly only the fault of George W. Bush, but anyone before him, then it was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's been a system that's been broken for a really long time, and it's pretty funny that people highlight Obama as the start of the issue. I genuinely think that there's probably this generational emphasis that's going to shift, because people in our age probably wouldn't say Donald Trump was the start of everything going downhill. They probably would have said, well, things went downhill with Bush, but then, Obama kind of steered us right. But then things started really falling apart once we got Trump back in there. And younger people probably would just say Trump. And, it's just this very limited frame of reference that people operate under, where it is things that happen in my lifetime are really where the pinnacle of things started going downhill or something like that, because it's a directly observable phenomenon for you. You can take your preconceived predispositions about politics and people, and then highlight a point and say that was the decline, ignoring the downhill cascade behind you that you weren't there really present for or aware. So I don't think this is a particularly informed point. And even when you look at something like, a successful period of time, economically speaking, like maybe in, I don't know, somewhere in like the 90s or something, in the Clinton years, when things you had like really the tech bubble and stuff like that. The tech bubble itself was the dot-com bubble burst and stuff was a really good indicator that no, this system is not designed for stability. There are tremors in the system, and they've only gotten larger. So the fact that you think that all of the problems started from Obama shows a complete lack of regard for anything in the financial sector. I mean, one, happening during the Bush years, but two, happening during the Clinton years, and three, that's not even acknowledging any of the sort of foreign policy blunders and mishaps happening during all these times, which of course are more and more coming to light, I think, as people are waking up, hopefully to some of the abuses that our government has been and is doing overseas.
Yeah, I think that like the best way I could put this in analogy is like you're going from point A to point B on a plane, right? You can basically more or less fly a straight line to get there, and it's going to be over a period of 2,000 miles to get there. If you at the very beginning of the flight, how much you go to the left or to the right, whatever degree you choose to go on, is going to have a disproportionate outcome, right? Then course corrections made further down, or course corrections or changes closer to the destination. And so the further you go back, right, like you go to Woodrow Wilson, you go to Abraham Lincoln, you go to John Adams, all these guys, it's like, okay, like they, from certain perspectives, maybe their changes were not super radical. In my perspective, they were, but maybe not as much as some of Obama's stuff. But they if you really want to go far back, it's like, okay, those guys set us on a certain path. And if you look in the scope of 200 years, it's like, yeah, we are way off course from where we originally were intending to be. And yes, Obama probably like course corrected us, not course corrected. I keep using that term, but like changed our course even more than those guys did in some ways, like made a more radical shift. But it's only been 4 years, right? Like the reason we are, 800 miles off from our destination to the left or to the wherever is not because Obama decided we were going to, in the last 4 years go a different direction. It's because people hundreds of years ago decided one way or the other, and we've just stayed on that path rather than actually course correcting back towards liberty, back towards freedom. So, yeah, you don't have to look very far to realize that it's like, oh no, these presidents that we think started most of our problems, they were just building upon their predecessors, right? Mistakes. Like a lot of Obama's policies were built upon George Bush's, which were built upon Bill Clinton's, which built upon George Bush's father, which built upon Reagan, all the way back, to George Washington. We have all these issues of power and people taking control where they shouldn't have taken control. And people be like, well, what do you mean George Washington? It's like, well, the guy put down the whiskey rebellion, right? Like he did some things that were not good that expanded the reach of federal government, that inched us a little bit to the left or to the right in such a way that we are further away from liberty now. So there are no good presidents, right? Most of them, the best you can usually give a president is maybe a C in terms of a grade. And those are usually the presidents that either died within a week of them getting elected, or they chose to literally do nothing, like Calvin Coolidge. But in general, it's not the fact that you have a good or bad president. It's the fact that you can't be a good president. Being in power like that means that you're going to make really big mistakes that alter and make people miserable, as opposed to just letting people make their own decisions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And like, with the example you give of like Washington, for instance, you do these little things and you set precedents, and the idea, at least in sort of its, most, I don't know, generous concession that you can give is that the federal government structure with the separation of powers is attempting to remedy this, right? It's attempting to prevent this type of little error here and there correcting the course. That's why you have a court that's supposed to review everything so that these little incremental shifts get corrected. But the problem is ultimately you still have a massive just a complete massive like structure of power set up for a entity that's going to just attract the most corrupt individuals. When you set up a structure, even with these, built-in systems that are trying to foolproof it from being steered off course, you're going to find the most megalomaniac, power-hungry people who are going to keep pushing it until these the correction mechanisms themselves are corrupt. I mean, if you think that the rule of law is going to save you, and that it was just President Obama was this radical communist who got into office and everything went downhill, then you're missing the point of the fact that over the years the institutions, let's assume for the sake of the argument, the institutions started out just perfect. They started out brilliant and just on point and have no issues. So if that's your starting point. Over the years, these institutions have corrupted. They've drawn in the corrupt people who want power. The powerful people may have been pushed back here or there with these institutions trying to course correct, but every bit is just a little bit looser on those joints, and the direction of the country gets more and more corrupt until, like in Washington State, our Supreme Court just ruled that a capital gains income tax is an excise tax. It's for those of you who aren't super familiar with taxes, that's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. It's just not true. Every single taxing entity in the other 49 states, in the IRS, every other country, every single entity that collects capital gains qualifies them as an income tax. Why did our Supreme Court rule it was an excise tax? Because it let them collect this new tax. They want an income tax in Washington, but the other structures that are set up are supposed to prevent that. So sure, on the one hand, you can say, look, the system is preventing them from collecting an income tax. And then you look and it says it doesn't matter because they're just calling the income tax the other thing. These institutions will do what they want regardless of the checks and balances that you're trying to put in. It's not the matter of the fact that we had, Jay Inslee in the governor office. It's not the matter that we have Obama in the presidency there. The problem is these institutions are designed to have power that will be abused. And that's just what you see up and down across the board on every level of government. And so if you're looking in this really narrow lens of where all the bad problems started, frankly, look at the moment they decided to have a federal government, I guess, or a government in general, maybe.
Yep. I don't have any more on this one. If you're
Okay,
good.
let's move. Yeah.
All right. I say good take from Ryan, I guess, to sum it all up.
Yeah, that's yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yep. All right. We've got a tweet from Peter Frampton. And today is March 27th, Monday. And we had a mass shooting or school shooting in Tennessee. I think several children died. Very sad. And Peter Frampton, in response to that, tweeted this. I have posted this before, but 26 years ago, a gunman entered Dunblane Primary School in Scotland, killing 16 kids and a teacher. The UK government responded by enacting tight gun control legislation. In the 9,400 plus days since, there have been a total of 0 school shootings in the UK. What do you think? Does this prove that Scotland and the UK made the right choice?
No, it does not. And I mean, the tragedy is just unreal. I feel horrible for the parents and for the families of the victims. But the thing about it is, like, I don't know what exactly I don't know what numbers you want to pull, but you look at the curve of crime in the UK, you look at the rate of homicides in the US and the UK over this time period, and relative to the populations and relative to the cultures already, like, in this time you didn't see a decrease immediately following that. You see a curve that went up and then down and then up again. In the US, it's like down and then up a little bit. So you compare relevant factors, and it actually didn't really curb the overall trajectory of violence. And now you might have taken out something horrible like school shootings in the UK, but you've also massively ramped up, like, the number of acid attacks in the UK, right?
Yeah.
You've rapidly amped up the abuses of knife violence and things like that. And so on the one hand, yes, you've been able to prevent school shootings, which is great, but that's not the only solution, and it's a solution that in many ways has caused other eruptions of violence. And so when you're looking at a policy and you're looking at an outcome, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you're not equating every single variable, or you're considering all the other factors, all the other variables. You're not jumping to conclusions and just seeing the data that you want to see. But secondarily, you need to say, like, is there a better way to do things? Now, is the culture and is the gun violence in the US a good thing? No, I think there's a terrible culture of violence. I think there's a terrible culture of gun violence. But a lot of that stems not from the guns being present and accessible, because the guns will be accessible no matter what, unless you make them unavailable to law-abiding citizens. But really, the major issue is the culture that enables the violence, whether that's gun, gang culture, or in this case, this was a trans person who had clearly had some mental issues. And the appropriate response in their mind was to take it out on Christian children in a private school because they disagreed with their views. There's so much polarization in the political realm that is boiled up into people thinking the only thing they can do is act out in violence in order to change things, because we're so polarized in the US and these cultures. And politics has become such a massive underthing where it's like, the people you don't like are going to do something, and you feel like they have so much power over you that these have massive consequences that drive people into these situations of violence. So, there's so many things that are boiling up to this being the problem. The access to guns is not one of them. And if you had armed guards or the ability to have people in better areas to protect themselves, you actually probably end up staving a lot of these harms off without introducing many new ones.
Yeah, this is such a terrible take, and I can understand how it feels like a gotcha, right? It's like, well, they've had 0 school shootings in the UK. That's not exactly true. It's been 0 school shootings in Scotland, not in the UK. There's been at least 2 other school shootings in the UK since this occurred. But uh, it totally neglects like the fact that like Scotland just 6 or 9 years after they did this, it was in 1996 that Dunblane primary school got shot up. 9 years later, the United Nations, who's not exactly a gun friendly organization, reported that Scotland was the most violent country of all the developed countries in the world. And this is borne out by the data, right? So it's not necessarily very good to take like Scotland and the UK's data and compare it to the United States. I'd rather compare it to a more gun-friendly country in Europe, right? Which is closer, a little bit more, demographically going to be similar. And so you look at one of the more gun-friendly countries in Europe, which is the Czech Republic. It has to Washington State at least has very similar laws, right? You're able to apply for a permit. I think it's like somewhere like 5% of their population concealed carries. So very similar to the United States in terms of its gun ownership and everything like that. Apples to apples, in Scotland, you are 20 times more likely to be assaulted than in the Czech Republic. You're 47 times more likely to be kidnapped. And then to this person's point, right, you have, in terms of the murder rate by youth per capita, 3 times more in Scotland than in the Czech Republic, right? So when you actually compare apples to apples, it's very clear, right, that this is not a point you should be making, right? Like Scotland is not better off than the other countries that have not taken guns away from their citizens. And I also, when I was researching this, there was an article in 2018, 14 children a week in Scotland are arrested for knife-related assaults in primary school per week. That is 2 per day. So yeah, you got rid of the gun violence in schools, right, by banning guns, but you still haven't figured out how to stop kids from stabbing each other, right? It's still at the same rate. And it's actually they talk about 16 kids killed in 1996. It's like from I think it was from 2008 to 2017. They had an average of 56 kids every year being killed in school by knife violence, right? So yeah, it's not like they figured it out, right? They just transferred the method of how kids are being killed from guns to knives. And maybe there's some merit to that in some way. I'm willing to have that discussion, but then you look at the broader society and it's like, oh, well, capable people, right, are less capable of being able to defend themselves from other types of assault because there are no guns, right? Guns make everyone equal in terms of the violence. I can be in a dark alleyway with Mike Tyson 20 feet away from me, and if I have a gun and he doesn't, my chances of winning, I would put money on me, right, versus Mike Tyson. Whereas if you don't have a gun, it does not matter who you are, you're probably going to be toast if you're against someone that is more physically capable than you. So yeah, the data to me indicate that societies with guns are in general more safe, and have higher, obviously they've got lower instances of violent crime in them, especially when you compare it to something like the Czech Republic versus Scotland.
Yeah. I think the other, stuff to look at too is I'm not particularly aware of the various things that happened in the UK on COVID, but I feel like their lockdowns and things like that were much worse. So you also just kind of put yourself as a citizenry in a much more vulnerable position.
Yep. Bless you.
Thank you. I think that's all I've got for that on.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, we've got a tweet, and this person writes, quote, work isn't supposed to be fun, unquote. Medicine is supposed to taste bad. Life is supposed to be hard. Like, why? Said who? We operate under this false notion that everything is supposed to suck when it doesn't have to. That's the whole point of advancement, to make crap suck less. What do you think about this take, Donnie?
I think this is hilarious because to me, it very much demonstrates the weird obsession that a lot of people have with the idea of like culture or this monolithic entity telling them these things, as though these mores or things that are just perceived as like general wisdom or generally true. I mean, these aren't even really right, is the funny thing. It's not work isn't supposed to be fun, or medicine isn't is supposed to taste bad or life is supposed to be hard. It's more like life is hard. And most of the time, work won't be fun. And medicine is gonna taste bad. Sometimes you need those things. It's not a matter of like, hey, you can't have fun at work. And like, oh, your life is too easy. No, it's just there are these mores that are saying like, if you're looking for fun out of work, you're missing what the issue is, right? Like the idea of work, broadly speaking, is to produce, is to create a livable, world for yourself, a livable means for you and your family. Medicine is supposed to taste bad. No, medicine isn't supposed to taste bad, but medicine serves a different function. Medicine isn't supposed to taste good. Medicine is supposed to heal you. And sometimes that means it needs to taste bad. Not it's supposed to taste bad. It needs to taste bad. Life is supposed to be hard. No, it's life will be hard at times, and you have to, as a as a person, you have to be willing to go through the hard moments of life in order to get to the end results. Like these aren't things that this person up at the top is writing down edicts, so you're not supposed to have fun at work. It's just these are mores and things that are true that people have found to be useful to know, to adjust to the realities of life. And I think this is someone who probably struggles with the idea of objective reality.
Yeah, to the point about medicine, someone commented on this, and it's a valid point, and it's true. It's that medicine tastes bad because you don't want kids taking it because it tastes good, right? They could
Yeah.
definitely make medicine taste good. They make a lot of things taste good. The reason medicine tastes bad is to prevent kids from taking a bunch when they shouldn't and overdosing on something. It's similar to why they make like propane. Like propane doesn't have any smell to it, right? They inject that smell into it so that oh crap, there is propane out there, and I need to figure out where it is because if I keep breathing, it's going to be bad.
And to bring Nintendo back into it, why they made their cartridges that are very small have a bad taste because kids, they don't want kids to eat them, and so they put artificial taste on video game cartridges. Same
Exactly.
concept.
And that is the kind of to your point about reality, right? Like work is hard. Producing things is hard. It's not a function of whether it's right or wrong. It's just a function of whether it is. And the fact that it is hard means that you are producing something, right? Or sometimes you're not, but it means that you're doing something that is difficult to do that must be done in one way or the other. And so and this was posted by a page. Obviously they got the Twitter username here, but it was from an Instagram page called Capitalism Sucks. And what I find funny about it is that like this person, rewind. I saw this video of Warren Buffett, who I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, but he was giving a speech at a business school, and he was talking about how like he lives in a middle class neighborhood in Nebraska. The average person there can afford those homes and all this stuff. And he's like, look, like this average homes here, they're like $400,000 to buy now. And the average person that lives in this neighborhood, can work at a grocery store and make ends meet here. And they live a better life than John D. Rockefeller lived in the 1930s, right? In terms of access to entertainment, the ability to travel, the access to medical and surgical goods, the ability to, see whatever they want to see on the television and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, we have tremendous advancement. Like work sucks a lot less today than it did even 50 years ago, right? Like the fact that you can, I was just in Costco the other day and I was like, man, there's just so much stuff here. Like, I just walk in and there's food that supplies food for hundreds of thousands of people, right? A population center of hundreds of thousands of people can come here and get food and leave without ever having to milk a cow, without ever having to, slaughter an animal or having to pick any fruit. Like it all just shows up here magically and we're able to go exchange some paper for it and get it. It's like, man, that is awesome. And if anyone has ever had to farm, if anyone's ever had to build anything, if you've ever had to dig a hole, right? Like you realize like how hard things can be. And the fact that we have things like, machines that can dig holes, that, the ability to mass produce crops, all these different things is a sign that things have gotten better, right? We can work only 8 hours in a day and have everything that we need. Whereas you used to have to work 16 and sometimes even that wasn't enough, right? It was all down to luck at certain points. So yeah, life is hard. It's just a function of reality. It's not a qualifier. It's what it is. No one said it. We just all know that that's what it is, right? Without having to, you wake up and the fact that you have to breathe takes effort. at some point in your life, when you're a child, that was hard to do. Like you had to consciously make a decision to breathe when you got out of your mother's womb. That's why they try and make you cry, because then it forces you to do that. So it's just a function of reality. And the longer this person operates under the assumption that it's a qualifier of good or bad, the more miserable they will continue to be.
Well, yeah, and I tend to think that this is kind of the person who dislikes America for the wrong reasons, and maybe they also criticize the bad things America does, but they probably are not a fan of free markets and the entrepreneurial spirit and that idea, at least, that America has tried to pursue, even if it has done so imperfectly. But so much of the comfort of this person's life, assuming they are from the US, has come from these sort of free market advances. The fact that we have a society where you feel that you are entitled to things, that is, even the idea that you can feel entitled to something without being born into like a rich class or royalty, that in and of itself shows the fact that life has sucked less. Because it, if you were born not that long ago, where you're born into a class system where it's not a matter of market exchange, it's a matter of serving your duty, knowing your place. You're a serf, you'll never be more than a serf, you can't make anything more of yourself, then you wouldn't feel entitled to anything except life being hard and sucking. The fact that you even feel like we don't have to make things suck. This, like, who said? That's the whole point of advancement, man. Like, yes, the fact that you can even feel that you're entitled to something better is evidence that we have advancement. I mean, even you think about not even that long ago in like the UK, their culture, uh, even rich people who'd made it through the free market kind of system, where it was like, oh well, they're new money, oh, we don't really associate with the new money, and it's like that was a class thing. That's not really even a thing anymore. There's so many ways where we have great advancement in society, both in the mechanical level like you were talking about, and also just in sort of an opportunistic ideological way, where you have these advancements beyond archaic notions of things that would make life harder. There are ways that life art is getting better, but the fact that you're so blind to this shows that we're actually making it, we're making the advancement, we're making things suck less, because you can complain about it and think that it's like this choice. You think that life being hard or medicine tasting bad is like this switch that's flipped because people just arbitrarily are making these decisions. Like, no, life is hard because reality is tough. And if you've been shielded from that, if you think that reality being tough is just like a choice, then you've probably been shielded from a lot of really hard things. I know I have. I probably don't have it nearly as hard as my grandfathers had it. And that's a blessing, because we have
Yep.
made advancement. So rather than saying like, what man, complaining, life doesn't need to be hard like this, let's say, yeah, let's continue to improve life, but recognize that the reality is always going to seep through, and we're fighting against atrophy, we're fighting against decay, we're fighting against corrosion of things that are built, because that is the natural state of the world.
Yeah, I mean, to hammer the point home, just 100 years ago, if this person wanted to get this message out to the hundreds of thousands of people that probably have seen it by now, they would have had to hop on a horse or hop on a steamboat and hand write 100,000 notes and hand it to everyone. Now they can just type it on a phone and it magically goes to space and then gets distributed to everyone. So,
Yeah.
uh, things have. I think that's a sign things have gotten easier.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, moving on to our last one. We've got two tweets. We've got the Libertarian Party, and they write national divorce, greater than national subjugation. And then someone replied, and this is the tweet that we are evaluating. I like the Libertarian Party better when its messaging was about things it could actually influence, not relentless conspiracy theories and absurd fantasies that will never, ever happen. Is national divorce implausible?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, but I also like the idea that um the point of the Libertarian Party should just be focused on things that could really happen, instead of absurd fantasies and theories. Like, if you think national divorce is an absurd theory, conspiracy theory, you also probably think that the rollback of COVID regulations was this big conspiracy theory, and you probably were really happy that the Libertarian Party was tweeting about like eminent domain when the governors were busy locking everyone in their homes. Like, I could see this tweet being the same thing. Like, man, the libertarians talking about how we shouldn't be locked down. Like, stop tweeting about things that aren't going to happen and start to fixing things that really matter. It's like, okay, I'm against eminent domain. I like incremental change. I like a libertarian party that is in the local area doing things for people in real ways as well. I like those things, definitely. Don't get me wrong. But you need a banner of inspiration for big changes in big ways, and that's what the Libertarian Party needs to stand for. It needs to stand for big bold truths and for saying the things that people don't necessarily want to hear all the time, or maybe introducing new ideas to people who haven't heard them before. I don't think national divorce is that crazy of a notion, and I think a Libertarian Party that isn't standing for something bold is just going to get lost in the humdrum of everything else.
You know, these people that say like, "Oh, that's never going to happen," right? Like the U.S. is too big, too monolithic for national divorce to peacefully happen. And it's like, okay, what? There's only ever been really, I guess China is now one of the superpowers, but there's only ever been three superpowers, right, in the world: the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. And what happened to one of those superpowers, right? Like it basically had a national divorce. You had the Soviet Union collapsed because they were founded on unsound economic principles and the unfound economic system. And they broke into smaller countries and they figured it out, right? Like I've been to some of those countries, right? I've been to Poland. I have been to Hungary. I've been to countries that have museums that show like, hey, the Soviets used to be here and we used to be under their thumb. And now we are no longer under their thumb, right? Because they no longer exist, right? And I'm sure that in the, the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, if you were living in the Soviet Union and maybe you'd been thrown in a gulag or you'd had friends or family that had been, you felt the iron fist of the government there, you'd be like, man, there's no way. No one is ever beating this thing. There's no way the Soviet Union is going to peacefully let some of these countries divorce from us. You would have been like, oh man, that's crazy. What a crazy thing to let that happen. But lo and behold, within 40 years, 50 years of the Soviet Union coming about, like, reality took its place, right, and forced it to have these. It collapsed, and it did happen. So it's not an absurd fantasy because we've seen it happen in the past 100 years to a superpower. And the Libertarian Party's role, right? The Libertarian Party is not going to win a presidential election in our lifetime, most likely, but they can shift the Overton window. They can shift what things are appropriate to talk about. And so they should be pushing that envelope, right? And kind of like you were saying, like, I want them to have bold messaging because then it gets these thoughts into the mainstream. That way, when you're talking to someone about them that that you can actually influence on a personal level, it's like, oh yeah, I heard about that. What is that about, right? Like, let's actually talk about national divorce as opposed to someone looking at you like you're from, some other planet and have some crazy idea, and you're not even living in reality. It's like, oh no, these ideas are out there. At least they're presented, and eventually they become something that is acceptable to talk about. So it's a good thing that the Libertarian Party is doing this. I really like the new Libertarian Party's messaging, and it makes it seem like there's a third viewpoint that can be had, right, or at least debated. Whereas before, it was kind of like liberal light, right? It was just whatever the Democrats did with a little bit of fiscally conservative policy, but nothing really actually conversation sparking.
Yeah, well, and this general thought process is a really dumb one, even if you were to take it on the more local or incrementalist level. So this person's saying, "Oh man, you should message about things that could actually happen or influence." Well, let's look at something that's not even the Libertarian Party. It's not. I mean, it is a more liberty oriented idea, but it's not necessarily libertarian or Republican or Democrat. It's just a good policy of like school choice. All my examples are going to come from Washington State because that's where I work. So apologies if you're sick of all the Washington State examples, but Washington State is a very blue state. I mean, it is extremely blue. It is very, very pro teachers union, which is an extremely powerful organization that influences all of the elections across the state and wields tremendous power here. So what are the things that are going to fight against the teachers union? Well, school choice, the idea of having competition to the public school so people don't have to go to a public school. You talk about in like the early 2000s. Oh, what's the point about talking about school choice? It will never happen. In 2012, Washington passed charter schools. Has it been hampered? Yeah, they haven't let more open since then, but we passed them. There are real charter schools that people can choose to go to. That's great. Oh, why are we still pushing on school choice? It will never happen. We haven't had it happen yet, but an education savings account bill was heard in the
Mm.
legislature. Not only was the bill pushed, a committee took the time to hear it and get committees testimonies from people. If they don't like a bill and they don't want anything to do with it, they won't have hearings. They don't want to bring those ideas to light. But a good idea, when you bring it up and you get more people talking about it, you get national excitement like education savings account have had from other states. When it is so in your face and it's being pushed from prominent parties and prominent thinkers, you can't ignore it. You have to contend with it. And eventually it can happen. And that's what I think the trajectory of school choice in Washington's had. And I think the same thing could be said that what the Libertarian Party is pushing for national divorce. Is that a bigger hurdle than an individual policy point in a single state? Sure. But that's this same fatalistic thinking would have made it so that we don't have charter schools, would have made it so we aren't going to make any progress in education savings account. And sure, you can say, well, eventually they're hampered or eventually it'll never come to fruition. What about the real lives that are being changed in the meantime? So
Yeah.
this person tries to be a pragmatist. They're trying to say, no, we just need to focus on the things we can fix. But when you do that, you don't end up actually helping people. You end up helping a small sliver and fraction of people and neglecting the larger grouping of people who you actually will be able to help if you just put in the fight.
Yeah. I don't have any more to add to that. So if you're good, I'm good.
I'm good.
Awesome. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Again, like, share, subscribe, message us if we said anything that you think was a bad take, or affirm us if we said good takes, anything like that. And we will catch you on the next one.